Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leaks Dragons of Tarkir set review for Black. Just to quickly go over the disclaimers, if you want the full story, you should probably go check out the White set review, and if you haven't already, why not? You're not just going to play one color in this format. But a quick rundown. Number one, I haven't played with these cards. I haven't proxied them. I haven't tested them. This is my first blush impressions of reading these cards and what I know about Fate Reforged and what I think the format might look like. That means that these ratings could change as I get more experience. This is just sort of my first look at these and how I'll be approaching drafting and sealed next week and the week after and the first few weeks of the season. Second up, this is a limited only review. I'm not going to be talking about constructed. I don't play that much constructed, and I just don't pick out cards that are standard playable or not standard playable, and generally they're fairly obvious which ones are competitive playable or not. But this is just about draft and to a somewhat lesser extent about sealed. Finally, these are just my opinions. These are how I rate these cards, how I approach these cards. They will have my biases factored in. If you hear a rating and you massively disagree with it, think about why I rated it that way. What did I say about it? Perhaps you've missed something, or extraordinarily likely, perhaps I've missed something. It's entirely possible I've missed an interaction. I've been known to read a card wrong here or there as well. But definitely this is designed to get discussion happening amongst the Magic community. Discuss the ratings, discuss them with me, discuss them amongst yourselves, and kind of come up with the ratings that you think they should be as well. I'm just providing this for, one further voice in the crowd of people doing set reviews. Alright, the first card is going to start off with a bang. We've got the uncommon dragon, Acid Spewer Dragon. It is just like the other ones, 5 and a black for a 3/3 creature dragon at uncommon. And it says flying, of course, death touch, megamorph, 5 black, and when Acid Spewer Dragon is turned face up, put a +1/+1 counter on each other dragon you control. I've already talked about this cycle a couple of times, and really everything I've said applies to this one as well. I'm not a fan of 6-drop 3/3 flyers. Giving it death touch doesn't do much for me. The lifelinker one, the 3/3 lifelink is okay. The hexproof one, death touch on a 3/3 flyer, just not really something I give a damn about, to be honest. Death Touch is a defensive ability. It's not an aggressive ability unless you're playing with Death Touch First Strike, which is pretty darn awesome. But this doesn't have First Strike, it just has Death Touch. It just seems way too expensive for me for what it is. The 7 mana just seems disgustingly expensive for a 4/4 Death Touch flyer. And as I've talked about, I'm not sure how many dragons you're going to have reliably in any one given deck. Not only because you may not see enough, but also because you may just not want to play that many because they are expensive, and because I'm kind of down on almost all of the uncommon dragons, which means that you're going to be picking a rare dragon, maybe, and nothing else beyond that. So I just don't think you're going to get the flip-up ability out of this very much. So I'm down on these dragons, as we know. I don't need to repeat myself over and over and over. This one does get a D. Less good than the lifelink one, and probably on par with the hexproof one. Next up is Ambuscade Shaman. This is a 2 and a black 2/2 creature orc shaman at uncommon. And it says, whenever Ambuscade Shaman or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and it has dash for 3 and a black. This is a 4/4 for 3 for a single turn, in which it can't attack or block or anything. So, I read this at first and I was like, yeah, cool, and then thought about it and realized it doesn't give the creatures haste. They get +2/+2, and generally they're going to have summoning sickness, so they're not going to do anything with that +2/+2. Now, obviously, what this is designed to do is enable dash. It's designed to enable a dash deck, where you're dashing out guys, they're getting +2/+2 each turn. There's a card we'll see tomorrow that further enables the dash deck. But I don't know if the dash deck's going to be a thing, kind of like the toughness deck that we'll talk about in a couple of days. It's there, the cards are there to get you into it, but I don't know if it's going to be any good. The big issue, of course, is if you're playing a dash deck, you're not establishing your board, which means you're not blocking. You're just taking damage left and right and hoping that your damage ends up being more. I don't know if that's going to be any good or not. Yeah, it remains to be seen. I mean, this guy by himself isn't that good. You know, the +2/+2, unless you're using dash, you know, it's just not good. It's a, you know, fairly terrible card. It's worse than a bear because it costs one more. You know, it can be totally okay filler if you are desperate for creatures, which is why it's going to get a C-. But I don't think it's any better than that in your average deck. If the dash deck happens, if it's doable, this is a guy you want for that dash deck, and his rating will obviously go up. But as I said, I'm not sold on the idea of the dash deck actually working out all the time. I'm excited to see it happen, but I'm cautious and slightly pessimistic that it will. Next up, we have Bloodchain Fanatic. This is a 1 black/black 3/3 creature orc warrior at rare. And it says, pay 1 and a black, sacrifice another warrior creature. Target player loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So, you know, this is interesting. Warriors may be a deck. It kind of fell off slightly after Fate came in, and I'm interested to see what the Warriors deck looks like in Dragons of Tarkir. Interestingly, there's a possibility of it being more red-white Warriors than black-white, but it looks like all of those options exist. And this will obviously be a role player in it. However, the issue is that Warriors are typically pretty low power in almost all cases. You know, you have things that give them cool abilities, and we had the Chiefs that buffed them up, but they're gone now. And so most of your Warriors are going to be pretty low. With Warriors deck, you typically go very wide with, you know, 1x and 2x and 3x's, which means that this Bloodchain Fanatic ability is going to be, you know, hitting your opponent for 3, maybe. Outside of things like Woolly Loxodon, which is gone, Krumar Bondkin, which is gone, Warriors are typically low power. You can get some incidental work out of this guy, you know. You can attack in, and whatever gets blocked and is going to die, you can sack it anyways to get the damage through. So, you know, there's some definite power there, and I can see this guy being a totally okay include in the Warrior deck, but I don't see it getting quite as awesome value as it could have if there were some, you know, truly high power Warriors out there. So I'm going to give this a C+. I like it. I just don't think it's all that awesome, and it relies far too much on other things happening to be truly good. So I don't want to go any higher than C+, but I'll go with a C+ on this one. Next up, we have Bloodchin Rager. This is a 1 and a black 2/2 creature human warrior at uncommon, and it says whenever Bloodchin Rager attacks, each warrior creature you control can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. So this is yet another warrior enabler. This is exactly like Herald of Dromoka, except instead of giving it all your team, or all your warrior team anyways, vigilance, your warrior team gets what is it, Pyreheart Wolf, I think, ability, where your creatures can't be attacked except by 2 or more, which is a really, really, really good ability. You know, if you have a board of 4 attackers, your opponent needs 8 creatures on the field to actually block your team, and that's probably not going to be a thing that happens. This is much more powerful than Herald of Dromoka. It's much more powerful than giving your team just vigilance. And he includes himself, which is nice. Herald of Dromoka doesn't include itself because it naturally has vigilance, so kind of the same thing. But the fact that it does include itself is quite nice, because that means he alone has to be blocked by 2 or more creatures. So this guy seems totally good, totally fine in a Warriors deck, and kind of like Herald Dromoka, it's nice because he's not only good in the Warriors deck. He's totally fine in a black-white, black-green, black-blue, black-red, black-whatever deck, regardless of the number of Warriors. So I give him a B-. He seems like a relatively high pick to then try to get Warriors, and if you don't, you're still not going to be too upset including this guy. So yeah, solid B- for me. Next up, we have Butcher's Glee. Butcher's Glee is 2 and a black instant at common, and it says target creature gets +3/+0 and gains lifelink until end of turn. Regenerate it. So this seems slightly better than bad. I didn't overly like Necrobite. I know there were proponents of Necrobite, people who adored Necrobite, thought it was premium removal. I'm not one of them. I just wasn't a big fan of it. But at least Necrobite was basically guaranteed to kill the creature that was being blocked. This doesn't necessarily guarantee that it will kill the creature. +3/+0 probably will kill the creature that you're blocking, and you'll probably play it intelligently enough to make sure the creature dies, but there's not that guarantee there. Yeah, you get some life out of it. You're going to get, say, a minimum of 3 if you put this on an O something blocker, and higher from there. But I don't know that that's worth a card. There was something similar in one of the Theros blocks. I can't remember what it was. Something about leeches, or the art had leeches on it or something, that leeched, or that gave your creatures lifelink, and it just wasn't that good either. I'm just not a big fan of these combat tricks that do something and give your creature lifelink. They're not awesome. They're okay, some of them, but I don't think this one is. The regenerate's pretty cool. That means that your creature does hopefully get to stick around, but I'm just not a big fan of this specific combat trick. I prefer the combat tricks that you get in other colors, and I find Black's combat tricks usually to be slightly lacking. So I'm going to go with a C- on this one. I can see it changing. I can see it going up a bit, but I feel like it's a bit similar to Necrobite. Next up, we have Coat with Venom. This is a 1 black, so a single black, instant at common. And it says target creature gets +1/+2 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. So it's similar to the last one that we look at, and it's a worse Necrobite. Necrobite was guaranteed to regenerate your creature. This one's not guaranteed to let your creature live. Now, giving your creature Death Touch should presumably kill whatever it's blocking, but like Necrobite, I'm just not a big fan of that. You do open yourself up to blowouts. You open yourself up to removal, your opponent's creature getting first strike, or anything like that. That just completely 2-for-1s you. Again, I don't tend to be that high on Black's combat tricks. Black's removal is great, Black's creatures are usually great, but I'm not a big fan of their combat tricks. Just like Butcher's Glee, I'm going to start a little bit down on this. I'm going to give it a C- as well, but I'm willing to be proven wrong with non-result oriented evidence from playing with this. But I'm going to start it a little bit low on it. I don't terribly want to play this card. Next up is Corpse Weft, which I had written down as Cope's Wift, and I had no idea what that was supposed to mean. I don't necessarily know what Corpse Weft means either. But anyways, it's 2 and a black enchantment at rare, and it says pay 1 and a black, exile 1 or more creature cards from your graveyard. Put an XX black zombie horror creature token onto the battlefield tapped, where X is twice the number of cards exiled in this way. Now, the big question here, of course, is how big is this zombie horror going to be usually? Well, typically you're going to play about 15, 16 creatures. Generally, you see maybe half your deck, so if you evenly distribute that, we're talking, 6 to 8 creatures hitting the battlefield. Of those, unless you're a huge pessimist, you'd expect 4 or 5 to end up in the graveyard. And so we're looking at an 8/8 or a 10/10 once in the entire game. And those are pretty big, but you're going to have to do some work for that. You're going to have to main deck this card, play it, draw it, play it, wait for the yard to fill up, activate it. Your opponent knows it's going to be coming because this enchantment's going to be sitting there for several turns until it's relevant. And I don't think this will bring you back from whatever awful situation you're in that you've had that many creatures die. You could, of course, use this as a lesser ability, not fueling out that 8/8 or that 10/10, but rather just fueling out 2/2s, 4 or 5 times. And that seems a little bit okay. You get some value out of your dead creatures, but I still don't know that I actually want to take up a card slot with this card. I don't think it's very good. I find global enchantments really need to do something for me a lot. Citadel Siege is a bit of an overpowered example, but Citadel Siege is a global enchantment that sits there and does something every single turn, and it's awesome. This sits there and does nothing until not only do you pump some mana into it, but a bunch of other things in your game have happened. namely creatures dying and going to the graveyard. That's guaranteed to happen, but at what speed and at what amount is really variable, and I just don't like taking up card slots and taking up turns playing cards like this. So this has got to get just a solid F from me. Seems like casual commander kind of fodder. Does not seem like something I ever really want to play in draft. Next up, we have Damnable Pact. This is an X black sorcery at rare, and it says target player draws X cards and loses X life. This seems pretty bad to me. Paying life for cards in general is pretty good. Sign in Blood, Abzan Charm, Underworld Connections, etc. But sorcery speed knocks that down a little bit. You know, you want to typically be doing this at the end of your opponent's turn, so you have a full hand on the next turn. At sorcery speed, you're probably going to be dumping a pretty good chunk of your mana into this and passing the turn. So you're knocking a chunk of your life off, tapping out, or nearly tapping out, not casting anything that you just drew, and basically giving your opponent a free time walk. That seems pretty bad to me, to be honest. So I'm not a big fan of the card on that axis. The other axis is that this card does say black X, where X is your opponent's life total, win the game. Because it says target player, so you can just say, oh, your opponent's at 10, or let's not say 10, because that would need 12 mana, and that's not realistic. But, let's say your opponent's at 6. 8 mana, your opponent's dead off this card. And that's actually pretty good. Now the question is, how often are you going to be able to have enough mana to finish your opponent off with this card? And I don't know exactly where that number lies or how reliable that will be. And so I really have a tough time grading this card. As a card draw spell for yourself, I have to give this an F. I don't like it for limited. Other formats, sure. Limited, I'm not a big fan of this. But that kill spell aspect is where the grade is really going to swing. I don't know where this is going to end up for me on that grade. I could see this being as high as a C plus, maybe even a B minus. I'm not sure. The issue, of course, is that you do need to use this as a kill spell. It needs to finish your opponent then and there. Because if not, you're filling your opponent's hand with cards. But if you can reliably kill your opponent with this, I think it could be an actually solid card. So, this grade, I don't know. Anywhere from F to B minus, let's say. And it's really going to depend on how this fully shakes out. But this is unfortunately the vaguest grade of all these set reviews that I'll be giving. Hopefully none of the rest will be as wishy-washy as this one. Next up, we have Deadly Wanderings. Deadly Wanderings is a 3 black enchantment at uncommon. And it says, as long as you control exactly one creature, that creature gets +2/+0 and has Death Touch and Lifelink. Now this is interesting. It's very similar to Homicidal Seclusion from Avacyn Restored, which was basically this card, and it gave your creature +3/+1 and Lifelink, I think. I don't think it got Death Touch. It really was kind of strange. And Avacyn Restored was a messed up format. It was a bad draft format. It's the worst I've ever played, actually. But mono black, self-sacrifice, play only a single creature was kind of a thing in Avacyn Restored, and Homicidal Seclusion was a pretty good include. Now this combos with Exploit because it has that self-sacrifice aspect. You can make sure you keep your board clean. But I think going all in on one creature is kind of dangerous in this format. It's something that I'm going to avoid myself. I'll let somebody else be the one to pioneer this enchantment and have it go through. But I'm really torn on this one. The benefit, of course, is that you can just play this properly. You can play this very carefully. You don't have to play every creature that's in your hand. You can play a creature with this enchantment out, and it has what was it, +2/+2, +2/+0, Death Touch and Lifelink, and your opponent can kill that creature and you can just replace it with one from your hand. You just keep them back. So I see the potential value in this, but I'm too cautious of a player to really go all in on this single creature strategy. So I'm going to give this a D. I'm torn on it. I want it to be good. I remember Homicidal Seclusion being good at times, and in the right deck and in the carefully crafted and played deck it was all right. And I feel like this might end up in the same. The lack of a toughness boost is kind of a pain, but the lifelink death touch is pretty nice because, of course, you can just slam your creature into their board, have it die to something, take something along with it, and you play another creature. But yeah, I'm cautious on this card, possibly overcautious. I'm excited to see somebody go off with this, but it's not going to be me, at least in the first couple weeks. Next up, we have a card that's not just similar to a card from Avacyn Restored. It is a card from Avacyn Restored. We have Deathwind. Deathwind is X black, instant at uncommon, and it says target creature gets -X until end of turn. This is extraordinarily solid removal. It's a kill spell. It's on curve for whatever you want dead. If you want a 2/2 dead, you can pay the 3. If you want a 7/7 dead, you can pay the 8. And you'll kill basically whatever you want. The rare exceptions are, huge things. A Tarka is going to be pretty hard to kill with this, considering you would need 9 mana out. But basically everything that doesn't have hexproof that you want dead is going to be dead to this spell. I'm very, very, very happy with Deathwind being in this format, and I'm going to pick it pretty highly. I give it a B+, actually. It just seems like solid, basically premium removal to me. Not quite premium because you have to really pay for it to get what you want out of it, but almost basically there. A solid pick for me, definite B+. All right, next up we have Deathbringer Regent. Deathbringer Regent is the rare Regent dragon for black. It is 5 black for a 5/6 creature dragon at rare. It has flying, and it says when Deathbringer Regent enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand and there are 5 or more other creatures on the battlefield, destroy all other creatures. Well, this sounds kind of interesting. I was definitely wrong on Sillimgar in my last set review for being so expensive, but I think that was more due to the hexproof than anything. The hexproof really made him excruciatingly resilient. This being a 5/6 dragon for 7, it sounds pretty expensive, but the board wipe ability probably should happen somewhat reliably, I think. It is 5 creatures on the battlefield total, so it's not just on your side, not just on your opponent's side. It's everything. So that shouldn't be too hard to expect on turn 7. Presumably, if you've made it to turn 7, there's some sort of stall happening, and you would expect there to be at least 3 creatures on one side and 2 on the other, if not more. And this guy's going to, just wipe the battlefield. And of course he does count himself too. So you actually only need 2 creatures and 2 creatures on each side of the battlefield. So I feel like this board wipe should happen relatively frequently, meaning that you're going to have an empty board with a 5/6 flyer on your side, which should close the game out. The issue is that it is 7. It is 7 double black. Thankfully, we are in what I predict to be an absolutely 2-color format. I think it's going to be a mistake to try to go more than 2 colors outside of a single card splash. So I'm not as down on the black as I usually would have been. But yeah, I think this guy's just pretty darn solid for what he costs. That cost is going to keep him down. I'm going to give this a B, because I don't necessarily like playing that many 7 drops in a format. But if this format's slower, then we could definitely see this being a very solid pick in the A range. But my prediction of this format keeps this at a B. Next up is Defeat. Defeat is a 1 and a black sorcery at common, and it says destroy target creature with power 2 or less. Now that sounds pretty weak. Destroy target creature, awesome, power 2 or less, oh, that's garbage. Well, it's not that bad. It's basically debilitating injury. Debilitating injury, more or less, the majority of the time, said destroy target creature with power 2 or less. Or sorry, toughness 2 or less. it had the upside that, of course, you could use it to kill something after combat, after it had been dealt damage and things like that. But it was still a pretty decent card. So does this compare enough to Debilitating Injury that I think it's good? Well, no, not really. You can't use it to finish off a damaged creature. It's sorcery speed, which is awful. You want to be doing this at instant speed. I have no idea why this couldn't be instant speed. 2 mana, destroy target power 2 or less just seems like not something that needs to be hindered by being sorcery speed. The nice thing is that late in the game you can kill off a Morph or a Manifest that somebody's been holding down, hopefully. But overall, I think this is just far too weak. So I'm going to give it a D+. We actually have some decent removal in this set, and I don't think this is a piece of it. Next up, we have good old Duress. Duress has been printed and reprinted several times. It is a 1 single black sorcery at common, and it says target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. That means that you're going to be grabbing a planeswalker, an enchantment aura, an artifact, something like that. Is this good? No. Duress is never really main deckable. I see people do it all the time, and I think it's always wrong. This is a card that's first and foremost for standard sideboards. It's not for limited. In limited, you can maybe side it in if you saw a planeswalker, although I don't necessarily care about any of the planeswalkers in this format in limited, but you could side it in if you see one and you're afraid of it, or if you want to potentially hit something like their board wipe or whatever big bad sorcery or instant they have. The best advice I can give you is don't go, aha, I have Duress, turn 1, swamp Duress, gotcha. Don't do that. Have a plan for what you want to be getting rid of. So say, for example, I want to be getting rid of, it's not going to be in this format, but let's say I want to get rid of Dune Blast, because Dune Blast beats me. And if they don't get Dune Blast, I beat them. You don't cast this on turn 1. You cast this when they have 6 mana. So when they're 1 mana short of Dune Blasting you, that means that you've given them 5, 6, 7 draw steps to draw that Dune Blast, but they're still completely unable to cast it, and that's going to give you a higher chance of hitting the card that you actually want. So make sure that you do hold on to Duress until the turn before they could cast the spell that you're trying to hit with it. And furthermore, as a sort of an overarching thing, make sure you're playing Duress with a plan of what you want to hit. Don't just throw it in your main deck to grab a cheap little combat trick or something. So this gets a D. This is a stereotypical sideboard card. It's just something that comes in when you see something that you just cannot deal with. Next up, we have Dutiful Attendant. Dutiful Attendant is a 2 and a black, 1/2 creature human warrior at common. And it says, when Dutiful Attendant dies, return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's kind of like half of Dutiful returned with a pretty darn weak body on it. So Dutiful Return was unplayable. Again, like Duress, I saw people play it, and I don't think it was ever really right. Taking away half of it and putting it on a pretty awful creature, I don't think makes it any better, really. As I talked about with Profound Journey, Reanimation, or in this case, just card recursion, is nowhere near as good as you think it should be in Limited, outside of Cube, of course. But this is not Cube, unfortunately. The targets are inconsistent, and they're generally pretty weak, and not worth wasting a card slot on something like this. I'm just not interested in playing Dutiful Attendant. I'm generally not that interested in returning cards from my graveyard. Not usually anyways. So I got to give this a D+. I don't think you should ever really play this. It's got some minor value, and yeah, sometimes you'll get something out of it, but I don't want to main deck this. I don't want to take this, so D+. Next up, we have Flatten. Flatten is 3 and a black instant at common, and it says target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn. This is Throttle for 1 less. This is literally just a better Throttle, and Throttle was totally playable. So, will I play Throttle for 1 less mana? Absolutely. This is not quite premium removal, because of course you have to be killing something that's 4 toughness or less, or be finishing something off after some combat damage. But it's basically there. This is a slight bonus from Deathwind. You're getting a 1-mana discount off of a -4/-4 Deathwind. Totally playable, pretty high pickable, probably first pickable in a really weak pack. And easily, I think, the best common in black. So some solid B+ for me. It can't go any higher because it's not premium. It doesn't hit everything consistently, but fantastic removal otherwise. Kind of strange how quickly Throttle has been completely made obsolete by Flatten. Next up, we have Foul Renewal. Foul Renewal is 3 and a black instant at rare, and it says return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the toughness of the card returned this way. So again, we've got more card recursion. There's almost a card recursion theme going on in this set in black. I guess this goes in the Toughness Matters deck, where you're going to be having some really big toughness creatures in your graveyard, but it just seems, again, so wildly inconsistent for me. And in Draft, I hate inconsistency. I hate cards that some games are worthless and other games are amazing. The amazing times do not make up for the worthless times. I like consistency in my limited decks, and this card is definitely the enemy of consistency. Not only that, but the average toughness of creatures tends to hover around 3 or so in a given set, meaning that on average, this is just a worse Throttle and an even worse Flatten, with some mild creature recursion tacked onto it. If you can actually kill something with it, it's probably okay, but I just have a hard time relying on cards that are this consistent. And not only that, but relying on a card that presumably means that my big bomby creature has died. I just don't like this card. I'm not going to take it too highly. I see the value out of it. I'm not going to give it an F or a D, but I'm going to go C- on it. Next up is Foul Tongue Invocation. This is a 2 and a black instant at uncommon, and it says, as an additional cost to cast Foul Tongue Invocation, you may reveal a dragon card from your hand. Target player sacrifices a creature. If you revealed a dragon card or controlled a dragon as you cast Foul Tongue Invocation, you gain 4 life. Edicts are always interesting. Giving your opponent a choice is usually pretty bad. You don't want to do that. If they need to choose between sacking Silumgar or Sultai Emissary, well, the choice is obvious, and you'd make a pretty big mistake actually playing this card in that situation anyways. It seems best used as sort of an early kill spell, where you're guaranteeing what they're going to sack, because they've only got a single creature on board. Killing off their more for their other turn 3 or 4 drop seems fairly okay with this. The later the game goes, the quality of this card goes down, down, down. The revealed dragon gain 4 life clause, I don't even care about that. Don't even factor that into the rating of this card. 4 life doesn't matter. This just seems like not premium, not great removal. I'm going to give it a C+. Forcing a sack is always kind of okay. And it ranges from being kind of okay to really okay, which, as I just talked about, is more consistent than ranging from awful to kind of okay, or even to amazing. So I'm pretty okay with this card. I'll probably include it in a number of black decks that I play, so I'm going to give it a C+. It's going to be playable, sometimes cuttable if you have better removal or something like that. Next up, we have Foul Tongue Shriek. This is a single black instant at common, and it says target opponent loses 1 life for each attacking creature you control. You gain that much life. This is black's version of Trumpet Blast, I guess. It's not the worst spell. All of your creatures are guaranteed to get a damage through, and you're going to get some life back from it, but it's not going to change combat at all. It's not going to make your creatures actually any bigger. They're still going to just as readily die and, not necessarily kill whatever's blocking them. Ultimately, I think this card's just way too cute. It's way too, weak of a trick to be playing to say, aha, you take some more damage, because typically you're attacking in an average black deck, 3 to maybe 5 creatures. So you're going to do maybe 3 to 5 life loss and gain 3 to 5 life. It's not the worst, but I feel like there's going to be so many situations where this is basically worthless, and I don't think it's worth a card slot at all. So I've got to go with a D on this one. Yet again, another example of a card that just wildly ranges from being completely awful to being pretty darn good in various situations. Next up, we have Grave Purge. This is another Innistrad block card. I believe it's from Dark Ascension, maybe just straight up from Innistrad. It's 2 and a black, instant at common, and it says put any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library, draw a card. So, I've talked about how I don't necessarily like graveyard recursion in Limited all that much. So putting it on top of your library is probably worse, right? Well, sometimes yes. In this case, since it's any number in any order you want, plus you take the top card right away, it's actually a bit better. This is actually a bit more playable. Late in the game, you get to kind of guarantee that you're drawing into good stuff. You're not going to put your 1/1 for 1 on top of your library. You're going to put all your good stuff that's died back on top. This isn't an awesome card. It's not an amazing card. It's not anything like that, but it's better than the recursion we have been getting. The instant speed really helps out with it. The fact that you can do it at the end of their turn, immediately draw the best creature from your graveyard, and then immediately after that, draw the second best card from your graveyard is actually pretty darn good. I do give this a C. I think it's pretty playable in a lot of black decks. I like this card. It's not awesome. It's not amazing. It's cuttable if you need to, but totally includable otherwise. Next up, we have Hand of Sillimgar. This is a 1 and a black 2/1 creature human warrior at common with Death Touch. And that's it. That's as plain as you can get. Obviously not literally as plain as you can get, but that's all. This is an aggressive creature. And I talked about this in the Fate Reforged set review when I talked about Sultai Runemark. And I talked about Death Touch being something that doesn't make sense on an aggressive creature, barring it having first strike as well. Ankle Shanker, of course, is just insane. But Death Touch is first and foremost a defensive ability. It's something that you want to have on something that's sitting back. You want to have it on a 2/5 that's just going to block and kill everything. You want it on a 1/1 for 1 like Typhoid Rats, where you're putting essentially no investment into it and getting to kill, whatever you want that's attacking in. This card's still playable as a 2/1 for 2 in an aggressive black-red deck or something like that. You'll get to kamikaze in with it sometimes. You'll get to slam it into a big thing and they'll block. But, you're really giving the choice to your opponent as to what's going to die here. I wouldn't really want to play this as a 2-drop Typhoid Rats that I keep back the entire game. I'd rather just play Typhoid Rats. My 2-drop I want to typically be aggressive. I want it to be getting in there for damage and whatnot. So, you're letting your opponent kind of dictate the usefulness of this guy, unfortunately, based on what they decide to block with it. But still a totally includable creature. He's not bad. He's totally fine as a mid to late pick, and he'll probably be in a fair number of black decks. So I give him just a straight, solid, middle-of-the-road C. Next up is Hedonist's Trove. This is a 5 black enchantment at rare. And it says, when Hedonist's Trove enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target opponent's graveyard. You may play land cards exiled with Hedonist's Trove. You may cast non-land cards exiled with Hedonist's Trove. You can't cast more than one spell this way each turn. Quick rules clarification here. Most of you probably know this already, but some people will ask me this, I'm sure. You cannot just play all of the land cards that are exiled with Hedonist's Trove. You still can only play a single land a turn, whether that be from your hand or from the exiled pile of cards. This is trash. This is Commander Wacky Wednesday kind of material. You still have to pay for the spells, which means you're going to have to be playing the lands. Unless your opponent is actively self-milling themselves, there's not going to be that many lands sitting in their graveyard to help you fix your colors. you're probably just not going to get much value out of this, and not for 7 mana. At 7 mana, you need to be finishing the game, not getting access to their little creatures that you finished off several turns ago. This is just a solid F. Don't play this. Leave it for somebody else to play. Leave it for me to play on a Wacky Wednesday rare draft or something like that. Next up, we have Kolaghan Skirmisher. This is a 1 and a black 2/2 creature human warrior at common, and it has dash for 2 and a black. So it is a dash bear. 2/2s for 2 are totally fine. They are completely and utterly playable and completely and utterly cuttable if need be, if there's something better. The dash is kind of strange. I don't necessarily know why I want to be dashing in a bear for 3. Sometimes you'll be able to get that surprise 2 damage in that finishes the game. Otherwise, it's obviously combinable with Ambuscade Shaman, the dash enabler that we talked about earlier in this review. To make this a 4/4 dasher, a 4/4 dasher for 3 sounds pretty good. But yeah, even outside of the dash deck, this is totally playable. So it's kind of like, who was it? What was his name? Bloodchain Rager. It was kind of like him, where you can take it and you can try to go down that all-in dash deck route, and if it doesn't work out for you, you still end up with a totally solid playable card. So straight middle-of-the-road C for me. Goes up a little bit if the dash deck happens to be a thing, but solid C regardless. Next up is Meringue River Skeleton. This is a 1 and a black 1/1 creature skeleton at uncommon. It has black, regenerate Meringue River Skeleton. And it also has Megamorph for 3 and a black. So this is, what was it? Dredge Skeletons. Dredge Skeletons was a 1/1 for 2 that you could regenerate for 1. This guy kind of wants to be in a set that doesn't have the most flyers ever, because it's a fantastic ground blocker. In a set where the majority of the creatures are on the ground, this guy just sits there and says, oh, you're a 7/7, I don't care. I'll just jump in front of you, pay a single black, and regenerate it, and everything's fine. Unfortunately, this set does have the absolute most flyers ever printed. Not even talking about just the dragons, just in general, this has the most flyers ever printed, which makes a 1/1 regenerate ground guy not that amazing, not as good as he would have been in other sets. And it wouldn't have been amazing in other sets, but it would have been useful in other sets. The Megamorph seems a little bit expensive to get a 2/2 for 4 with regenerate. And if he's just going to be a blocker, he doesn't really need to be a 2/2. He's fine as a 1/1 being a regenerate blocker on the ground. Ultimately seems pretty cuttable to me. Bit weaker than he would have been in other sets, I think. So I'm going to give a C- to him. Next up, we have Marsh Hulk. This is a 4 black 4/6 creature zombie ogre at common with Megamorph 6 black. So it's a 4/6 for 6, or it's a 5/7 for 7. Is that playable? No, it's not. A vanilla 4/6 for 6 is just not something you ever really want to play. A 5/7 for 7 is just something you never really want to play. This seems to me like a classic skill tester card. New players will look at this and they'll see big numbers and they'll say, oh, that's awesome, but it doesn't have evasion, it doesn't have any abilities, it doesn't have reach, it doesn't have anything. For such a high cost, this guy should have something else going on. To me, this is just stone unplayable, so solid F from me. Next up, we have Mind Rot. This is a perennially reprinted card. It's in a number of sets, and we had a similar card in Cons. It is 2 and a black sorcery at common, and it says target player discards 2 cards. So it's Rakshas's Secret with the self-mill taken off. Mind Rot's reprinted frequently, and it's always sort of okay and fringe playable in limited. It's never something you're happy about. It's never something that you pick going, aha, I'm going to play Mind Rot. But you're never usually super upset about including it. A well-timed Mind Rot is really, really good. Similar to Duress, you don't want to play this on turn 3. You don't want to just snap play this the second you can. You want to play this strategically. The best time to play this is when your opponent has 2 cards. So they go, and if it's on curve, so say you're doing this on turn 4 or 5, when they've played out stuff and they have 2 cards left in their hand, Ideally, you completely surprise them, and it goes from them having 2 cards that they're ready to slam down in the next turn or 2, or they're holding on a bomb that they just need a couple more mana for, and you rip them out of their hand, and they're suddenly top decking, and that's a massive swing. Going from having a plan with 2 cards in your hand to having 0 plan and 0 control is huge. Playing this on turn 3 when they have 5 cards, you're going to get 2 lands out of their hand. They're not going to care. So play this very carefully, play it properly, and don't main deck it if you have better stuff than this. So it is a C- ultimately, but it is still a playable card some of the times. Just make sure that you do play it properly, play it strategically. Don't just throw it at them the second you can. Next up, we have Minister of Pain. Minister of Pain is a 2 and a black 2/3 creature human shaman at uncommon, and it says exploit. When Minister of Pain exploits a creature, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn. So this guy comes into play, and you sack a creature, and something on your opponent's side gets, everything on your opponent's side gets -1/-1. Maybe you kill some guys off, maybe you finish some guys off after combat damage has been assigned to them in the second main phase. But maybe you get something out of this. The real issue, and this is my issue with exploit as a whole, is the ability worth sacking a creature? You could, of course, just sack this guy. You could cast him as a spell that says your opponent's team gets -1/-1, which, it's not the worst. We've had Shrivel before, but it wants to be in a fairly specific format where there's a lot of X1s kicking around. So the question is, how good is sacking another creature or this to give your opponent's team -1/-1? And I'm not really sure. -1/-1 to the team, not at instant speed, just doesn't seem that powerful, and I don't know that it's worth sacking a creature or including as basically a spell as you could with this guy. So I'm going to give him a C-. I'm kind of low on the non-rare exploit cards and some of the abilities on the exploit cards. I'm going to have to play with them, as I've said before in the blue set review. This is kind of my manifest. I need to play with them to really get a handle on it. Manifest, of course, when people were new to the set, when it was being spoiled, everybody was thinking about manifesting Woolly Loxodons. It's going to be so awesome to have a flying lifelink Woolly Loxodon. It's going to be so awesome to have a flying hexproof Woolly Loxodon. I don't think I ever manifested a Woolly Loxodon, and I almost never manifested anything sizable. It was usually a land, which is what I predicted, but I was still cautious. I wasn't certain of that prediction. And exploit's kind of in that same vein, where I don't quite know just how powerful these abilities are going to be in comparison to sacrificing a creature for them. So I'm going to have to play with it, but this one I'm going to start kind of down on at a C-. Next up, we have Pitiless Hoard. This is a 2 and a black 5/3 creature orc berserker at rare, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep you lose 2 life, and it also has dash for 2 black. So this seems deceptively strong to me. Playing it on turn 3 and just turning it sideways seems fairly awesome. You're going to get in for some serious damage, or just trade with one of their creatures. Either way, the 2 life loss is not as serious as it sounds. You're not going to have this sitting there for the entire game just draining you for 10, 12, 14 life. You're going to be turning this sideways every turn. You're going to be getting in for damage, and you're just going to be throwing this at something that's going to die to it. And then you get to turn off that 2 life loss. So that seems fine to me just with that. The dash makes it even more awesome and makes it a pretty potent finisher, possibly. Combining this with Goblin Heel Cutter would be pretty gross, or even just that surprise attack where your opponent, maybe swung in and didn't leave up any blockers, or they left up 1 blocker, or you're in some way going to be able to get in with this guy. Not only that, but the dash gets around the 2 life loss, because this guy is never going to be around during an upkeep step with the 2 life loss. I could see this being really awesome with that ambuscade shaman, making this a 7/5, which comes out on turn 4 attacking would be crazy. Well, hold up. What's the shaman cost? 3. Yeah, this could come out turn 4 as a 7/5. Seems crazy. I really like this card. If there's a dash deck, I'm excited to play this in it. Even without the dash deck, I'm pretty happy to play this in it. You should basically consider this guy to have the must attack each turn Fabled Claws on it, because you don't want to have that 2 life loss sitting around for too long. So yeah, I give this a B-. I'm pretty happy to pick this guy, and pretty happy to play him. Next up, we have Carri Sadist. This is a 1 and a black 1/3 creature human cleric at common, and it has exploit. When Carri Sadist exploits a creature, target opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. This seems bad. This seems just bad. I don't want to play a 1/3 for 3. That's the Jeskai student power and toughness that I have never really been a fan of. But not only that, I just don't think the ability is that good. The 2 life loss, 2 life gain in exchange for a creature, even if it's just himself, which means it's in exchange for a card, doesn't seem that good to me. I just don't want to play this card. I don't want to sack a creature for this ability, and I don't want to play this card just as this ability, just sacrificing itself. So I'm pretty down on this card as well. I'm going to give it a D+. I just don't see that ability as being all that relevant at all. Next up, we have Rakshasa Gravecaller. This is a 4 and a black 3/6 creature cat demon at uncommon, and it has exploit. When Rakshasa Gravecaller exploits a creature, put 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield. Well, this one seems actually pretty decent to me. As I've been saying, I'm pretty happy with some of the exploit cards, and the other ones I'm not too sure about. This one is one where the sack of creature seems worth it. There's going to be a ton of creatures kicking around by turn 5 on your battlefield that you don't really need anymore. There's going to be some 1/1s or 2/2s or other little piddly things that would be much better as 2/2s. Not only that, but they're not tapped zombies, which most zombies are when they come out of the graveyard. So I'm pretty happy with this. I think it's a solid pickup in a black deck. It's got a sizable body on it on its own. 3/6 isn't quite what you want usually in black. That's more of a white kind of staller, kind of Great Horn Cruciak style card of power and toughness, but still a sizable enough body, and I do think the ability is pretty decent. I don't know that I would ever pay 5 mana for 2/2 zombies, so I don't know that I'd ever exploit this to itself, but I definitely look to turn one of my boring 2/2s from early in the game into 2/2s. So I'm pretty happy with this. I give it a B-. Next up, we have Reckless Imp. Reckless Imp is a 2 and a black 2/2 creature imp at common, and it has flying. Reckless Imp can't block, and it has dash for 1 and a black. So, it seems fairly okay, but I think it's also somewhat cuttable. A 2/2 that can't block is obviously purely designed for an aggressive deck, and the dash makes it even more so. Again, just like any dash, this is combinable with the ambuscade shaman to make it pretty big, but I'm still not sold that the dash deck is actually something you want to do, just because I want to establish my board and not just have creatures that come down, attack, and then go away all that much. It could be good, but you're going to leave yourself to a fairly empty board with the dash deck. Now, that being said, this guy can't block anyways, so it doesn't terribly matter. So maybe you do want to dash this guy in most of the time. He ultimately just seems fine. Middle of the road C. Playable, cuttable. He's both, I think. Next up, we have Risen Executioner. This is a 2 black 4/3 creature zombie warrior at Mythic. Risen Executioner can't block. Other zombie creatures you control get +1/+1, and you may cast Risen Executioner from your graveyard if you pay 1 more to cast it for each other creature card in your graveyard. So if this is the only creature, you can cast it for 4. If there's one other creature, you cast it for 5, etc. So we've got a zombie lord. We've got a guy that gives +1/+1 to all your zombies. That's awesome, except there's very, 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 very few playable zombies in this format. There's Sultai Emissary. There's a rare that we're going to talk about. There's a few cards that I'm just kind of okay including, I guess. There's Gurmag Angler, which is actually not terrible, and it being a 6/6 would be better. But ultimately, there's just not remotely enough for this guy to be a zombie lord in this block. This is probably meant more for commander or casual or something like that than it is for this format specifically. So it's not going to be an effective zombie lord. I don't think you should play it for that plan. There's only 4 in Fate total anyways, and only 2 of those are playable. Yeah, I just don't think this is a good card for this format. The not blocking is pretty bad for your 4-drop, for your 4/3 4-drop. Being able to recast it's kind of cool, but ultimately I just don't think that this is a card that you're going to be all that excited to play in this format. Pretty cool in some other formats, pretty cool in a zombie commander deck or something like that, but in this format, it's not for me. I'm going to give it a C-. Just not terribly excited by this mythic, unfortunately. Next up, we have Self-Inflicted Wound. This is a 1 and a black sorcery at uncommon, and it says target opponent sacrifices a green or white creature. If that player does, he or she loses 2 life. So entertainingly, you could hit your opponent with this if they don't have a green or white creature, and it just does nothing. So this card would say target opponent, period. You're not going to do that, obviously. You're going to play this as a sideboard card, just like the other color hosers we've talked about so far. This is a bit weaker than the other ones, I think, because it is sacrifice, so your opponent gets to choose which creature they want to, take off. This is a D. It's a straight-up sideboard card. It's a card you're not going to main deck. It's a card that you're going to bring in when you're playing against a green-white deck, or a green or a white deck. So it's actually a little bit more playable against a green other deck or a white other deck than the other ones are, because it's still going to hit something most likely. Again, it's going to really depend on bringing in those games, depending on the density of their threats in the appropriate color. You're never going to main deck this, though. It's just a sideboard card, and there's not that much else to say about it. Next up, we have Shambling Goblin. Here's one of the zombies that maybe you play your zombie lord for, but I don't think so. This is a single black 1/1 creature zombie goblin at common. And it says when Shambling Goblin dies, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. This is obviously an exploit target, I think. You play this to exploit it to hopefully kill a creature. But I don't quite know. This is one of the other reasons I really need to see exploit actually in the field, because I don't know if you want to include mediocre creatures just to have exploit targets. I'd rather include just good creatures and not have exploit targets. So I ultimately don't think this guy is playable really in any way, shape, or form. It just seems bad to me. It's a 1/1 for 1 that has a pretty minor effect when it leaves the battlefield. If you can kill something with it, cool, but your opponent outside of the exploit option is going to be kind of the one who decides when that's going to happen. So I don't think I ever want to include this in my decks. I don't think I ever want to pick it. It's going to get a D+ for me. I see the potential value out of it, but it's just not for me, and I just don't think it's very good. Next up, we have Sipsig Icebreakers. This is a 2 and a black 2/3 creature zombie at common, so another zombie for your zombie lord. And it says when Sipsig Icebreakers enters the battlefield, each player discards a card. So you discard a card, and your opponent discards the card. It seems pretty middle of the road for me. 2/3 for 3 is fine. It's an answer for morphs for the first few turns at least. Obviously not an answer for morphs after turn 5 or so, but it's an answer for morphs on turn 3. The discard clause seems fairly give or take. You really want this to come down on turn 3, I think, which means the card that you're going to get out of your opponent is probably a land, and the card you're going to throw away is probably a land. I doubt this is going to be an enabler for any awesome foul renewal engines or anything. I think it's just a filler card, and it's a totally okay filler card as is. So I give this a middle of the road C. I think it's one of those cards that If you need creatures, this guy's a creature, and you'll put him in. If you don't, if you have better things, then he will sit in the sideboard. Next up, we have CDC Undead Vizier. This is a 3 black legendary creature zombie naga at 4/6 at rare. It has Death Touch. It has Exploit. And it says, when CDC Undead Vizier exploits a creature, you may search your library for a card and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your library. This seems really, really, really good to me. A 4/6 Death Toucher for 5 seems pretty solid to me. It blocks and it attacks really, really, really well. The Exploit is also pretty awesome. You know, getting a demonic tutor out of your worst creature, which on turn 5 is probably going to be something pretty irrelevant by that time, and turning it into basically a second copy of the best card in your deck seems pretty good. You get to go and get your bomb. You get to go and get your 6-drop that next turn is going to just demolish your opponent. Tutors are usually much less good in Limited, and that's because they tend to be expensive. You know, Diabolic Tutor, for example, was really, really hard to justify playing it because it was so expensive. But a free tutor on a totally playable creature, or virtually free anyways, seems pretty darn solid to me. I'm pretty happy with CDC. I'm never going to cast it as an evoke card. I'm never going to sacrifice CDC to herself. But I'm totally happy taking this card pretty highly and playing it all the time. So A- for me. Next up, we have Silumgar Assassin. This is a 1 and a black 2/1 creature human assassin at rare. And it says creatures with power greater than Silumgar Assassin's power can't block it. It has Megamorph for 2 and a black, and it says when Silumgar Assassin is turned face up, destroy target creature with power 3 or less an opponent controls. So this seems pretty good to me as well. You know, it's not a bomb, obviously. It's just a utility creature. But, you know, it's a 2/1 for 2, which is totally fine. It's a 3/2 for 3, which is totally fine. And when it flips up, it kills an awful lot of the early game stuff. An awful lot of it. Later in the game, just like, what was it, Hidden Dragon Slayer? No, because that destroys big things. There was something earlier that we talked about in the white or blue set that kills something with low power. And late in the game, there may still be a morph kicking around that is a high power creature, but it's a 2/2 and totally killable by this card at that point. I would love to play this in an aggressively focused black deck where you play it on turn 3 as a morph, you flip it up on turn 4, destroy their ideally only blocker, and start getting in for a whole bunch more damage. It just seems really good to me. Absolute B+ from me. Again, not a bomb. You're not going to finish the game. This isn't going to make you go into black, but absolutely solid value utility creature. Next up, we have Silumgar Butcher. This is a 4 and a black 3/3 creature zombie djinn at common. It has Exploit, and it says when Silumgar Butcher exploits a creature, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. Now, -3/-3 on turn 5 sounds a little bit late to me. By turn 5, we're going to start seeing bigger things on the battlefield, which means we're going to need to be sacrificing a creature to kill off something they played earlier that's probably going to be starting to get more and more irrelevant by turn 5 and later. It's not going to hit very many bombs at all, outside of being played post-combat, of course, where it could finish off a creature. If this was cheaper, I think it would be pretty decent, but as it is, I just feel like it's pretty middling. Includable if you want it, and not includable if you don't. So that is the definition of a C for me. Next up, we have Ukid Cobra. This is a 3 and a black 2/5 creature snake at uncommon with Death Touch. So this is sort of okay. This is kind of like what I like to see in a Death Toucher. You know, I like 1/1s for 1. I like that turn 1 play, forget about it, don't even worry about that 1 mana investment, and you're going to get to kill something. Now, a 2/5 Death Toucher is a little bit better because it's not, ideally, a single turn blocker. You know, ideally this can block and kill multiple things over multiple turns, or just simply keeps your opponent from ever attacking into you, at least until much later in the game. And for 4 mana, isn't that big of an investment either for a card that's hopefully going to just hold your opponent off. Now, remember what I said, this set does have the most flyers ever, which makes a 2/5 ground blocker a little bit less good, but still I think this guy is totally playable. Cuttable in certain situations if your opponent is really heavy on the flyers, maybe not quite as good, but ultimately I think a C+. I think he's more playable than he is cuttable. Next up, we have Ultimate Price. This is a 1 and a black instant at uncommon. I wish it was at common, but no, it's at uncommon. And it says destroy target monocolored creature. This is huge. This is from Ravnica, I think, or maybe Gatecrash, but it is premium removal. There's not going to be that much gold kicking around. Most of the playable gold is at rare and mythic rare in this format. There's no common gold, and there is only 5 uncommon gold targets for this card. Almost everything you're going to see on the other side of the battlefield is going to be monocolored, which means that this just blows it up. Blows it up. This is premium removal to me. Absolutely first pickable in probably most packs outside of an insane bomb rare. So I've got to give this a solid A. Take this card and love this card. Next up, we have Virulent Plague. This is a 2 and a black enchantment at uncommon that says creature tokens get -2/-2. So just permanently, any token that comes out, -2/-2. I don't see a reason for this card, really, in this format. There's not that many tokens kicking around. Yeah, there's some goblins here and there. There's some warriors here and there. But I don't necessarily see taking up your third turn, where you want to be playing a morph, and taking up an entire card slot with this enchantment just to stop those tokens from running amok as really being a thing. This seems like a standard thing, something to take down Jeskai tokens or something like that, an obvious sideboard card. But in Limited, it's just a straight up F, I think. Just bad, bad, bad. Don't take this card, don't play this card. Next up, we have Vulturous Aven. This is a 3 and a black 2/3 creature bird shaman at common. It has flying, exploit, and it says when Vulturous Aven exploits a creature, you draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. It seems pretty solid to me. A 2/3 flyer for 4 is fairly okay. And being able to sack another creature, hopefully one that's not doing you much good or that's pretty weak, or even better that has a leaves the battlefield effect, to get a sign-in blood seems pretty darn solid to me. I'm totally happy to pay 2 life, draw 2 cards at the cost of a creature. And of course the magical Christmas land that isn't that magical or that Christmassy would be sacking a youthful scholar to this and drawing 4 cards. Which would be awesome. Being left behind with a 2/3 flyer just makes it all that better. I'm pretty happy to see this guy. I'm pretty happy to take this guy kind of highly, I think. I think it's going to be a solid card. And just drown your opponent in card advantage. I've got to give this a B-. I'm very happy to take this card, very happy to play it. Very happy to see it at common, too. Finally, we have the last card of black. We have Wandering Tomb Shell. This is a 3 and a black creature zombie turtle at common. It is a 1/6, and that is it. There is no abilities on this card. It is just a 1/6 for 4. Is a 1/6 for 4 something I want to play? It is very, very, very not. This is for that Toughness Matters deck, which I promise we'll talk about in a couple of days. The reason I'm very iffy about the Toughness Matters deck is because it explicitly requires a single rare card to even happen. We'll see if it happens. We'll see if it's playable. We'll see if it's doable. But outside of that deck, I don't really see a reason to ever play this card. Perhaps in the absolutely most grindy, most controlling decks, you'd want to play this down. But even then, as I said, most flyers of a set ever, they're just going to go over this guy's head. Doesn't seem like something I ever want to play. I've got to go with a D-. It stays out of F range because of the magical Christmas land Toughness Matters deck. So yeah, that's about it for black. Black's really interesting. It's probably, I would consider to be the weakest on average color of the entire set. But the removal in it is amazing. Ultimate Price, Flatten, there is some solid removal in this color. So what I'm really wanting to do is pair black with some other colors. I don't necessarily want to be majorly black. But pairing it with some other colors with the awesome removal seems like a really good play. And there's some fun creatures in here I want to play with too. CDC for sure, Vulturous Aven for sure. There's some good cards in here for sure. It's the weakest of the colors in my grading anyways, but not by much, by fractions. The only thing that really stands out to me is white so far. I'm not saying that black is going to make you lose. I'm just saying it is a little bit weaker compared to the other colors. But wow, is that removal pretty good. Anyways, as always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, definitely let me know in the comments below. You can also find me on Twitter at @TheManaLeak. That's LEEK, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me on Facebook.com/TheManaLeak, and links to those social media websites are in the show notes for easy clicking. You can also follow me here on YouTube. You've already found me here. The next step, of course, is to like the videos by clicking that little thumbs up icon and subscribing to the videos. That'll keep you up to date when all the latest videos come out. When the next set review comes out, you will be one of the first people to know about it, and it also helps me reach more subscribers. So, as always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow for the red set review.